This is how liberal stigmas about child marriage were adopted by Christianity in the late 18th century and then globalized by the mid to late 19th century. This brings us to pedophilia. Pedophilia is not an ancient concept. The first documented use of the term is 1906. Pedophilia initially means a psychiatric disorder in which an adult fantasizes about or engages in sexual acts with a prepubescent child. Gradually, pedophilia came to mean any adult who has sexual interest in a person below 18, the age of consent. And of course, the age of consent is artificially set to match mandatory schooling ages. So in essence, the pedophile is someone who has graduated, who is sexually attracted to someone who hasn't graduated from whatever amount of schooling the state has mandated. Now, many will claim that child marriage causes psychological harm. It's interesting that pre-modern people understood trauma and the emotional damage that can come from certain sexual behaviors like sodomy and prostitution, but there's no evidence that anyone in pre-modernity viewed adult-minor relations as traumatic. Even modern research casts doubt on the existence of psychological trauma from adult-minor sexual relations. Psychologists Bruce Rind, Philip Tromovich, and Robert Bosserman have published meta-studies critically analyzing this. What they discovered is that while there can be problems in some cases, there's no inherent harm with adult-minor relationships. The only harm comes from it being socially taboo in current society rather than anything objective or inherent. These psychologists received backlash, as you can imagine, and we can dive deeper into the studies later, but the point is the claim that minor marriage is bad because it objectively causes psychological harm is unproven. So it's bizarre that anyone should depict new modern norms on pedophilia as obvious or eternal invalidity. Such norms were literally inconceivable in the pre-modern period for the many reasons I've mentioned. All this is why attitudes toward child marriage have shifted historically. The burden is on my opponent to give a better explanation for why there was such a radical change in attitude starting about 300 years ago. If child marriage is this objective and universal evil, please explain why 99% of humanity throughout history was blissfully ignorant of this. This is even more of a burden for my opponent to explain because he's a Christian who believes in revelation. Why doesn't the Bible condemn child marriage? The Bible condemns homosexuality, which hasn't been as commonplace historically as child marriage. Was the author of the Bible simply ignorant? Or is it more likely that the author of the Bible is fine with child marriage? That's certainly what countless Christians throughout history believed and practiced. Now I want to take things one step further. Not only do I believe that minor marriage was acceptable in the past, I also believe that it's an institution that society abandons at its own peril. The fact of the matter is children hit puberty in the 8 to 15 age range. When puberty hits, they biologically experience strong sexual desires, and they'll express this one way or another. Either they'll express it within the safe, stable bonds of marriage, or they'll express it through masturbation, hooking up, sexting, porn use, or worse. Those are the only two options. Any country that denigrates marriage for adults will inevitably encourage sexual liberation and promiscuity for adults. Likewise, any country that denigrates marriage for minors will inevitably encourage sexual liberation and promiscuity for minors or children. The unprecedented degeneracy we see in society today is a direct consequence of preventing marriage for minors. Christians of all people need to wake up and see what's right in front of them. And ultimately, this is why we all need to appreciate Islam and the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In his marriage to Aisha, the mother of the believers, he has provided a timeless example of this institution which is so desperately necessary for all societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll be going into the rebuttal section next. Mike, I have the timer set for you for 8 minutes. The floor is all yours.
All right, well, I think I did a pretty good predicting what Daniel would say in his opening statement based on what I just heard there. Let's talk about some of the things he said. So he said it was perfectly normal before, again, Western Christians came along and ruined us. No, Michael Flynn notes in a European demographic system that the average age people would marry between 1500 and 1820 in Europe was 25 to 26. Brent Shaw notes in his paper, The Age of Roman Girls at Marriage, that in Tuscany, girls would marry between 16 and 21 on average, in Florence, 15 to 19. Rudolph Bell notes that in Italian communities in the 19th century, they were marrying within their mid-20s. Peter Laslett says that in England, the average age that women were marrying was 22. Okay, and that was in the 17th century. Piotr Gaswowski says in The Origins of the European Marriage that the average age women were marrying in Poland in the earlier periods was around 20. And again, you can also read Kim Phillips' book, Medieval Maidens. Average age women were being married, again, late teens to early 20s. But you brought up Bruce Rind. I've been waiting months for you to bring up Bruce Ryan. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's talk about Bruce Ryan here for a little while. Bruce Ryan, for example, that's probably the same paper you referenced in your the debate reviews, Harris Sultan, hebephilia as a mental disorder. He says, for example, on page 7, child sexual abuse researchers have repeatedly maintained that hebephilic interactions are innately and intensely harmful for the younger person, and then he cites his own research to demonstrate that. So he is directly arguing that this is harmful to children. What he's basically saying in his paper is that the active partner, the human, is not suffering from a mental disorder like schizophrenia. It's something that naturally arises in humans. Just like humans naturally steal, murder, and rape. That doesn't mean it's useful or good. He describes it as a harmfully mismatched, neurologically evolved traits on page 6. But what Daniel has not told you about this paper, even though he's been citing it as far back as 2019, is the paper mainly focuses on homosexual hebephilia. He is trying to say that is not a mental disorder. He says it's been pervasive in numerous cultures around the world. He's got a table in his paper that's 4 pages long of how homosexual hebephilia has been practiced around the world in various cultures, including Islamic societies. To quote from page 15, male to immature homosexuality was pervasive in Islamic societies from the 8th to the 19th centuries. Boy attraction was seen just as normal as heterosexual ones. Main interest was in boys early to mid-teens, peaking at about 14. The appeal vanished with the beard. Adult men were scorned if they were passive partners because manly behavior was to be the active. Staggering amounts of love poetry show an obsession with boyish beauty, seen as comparable to women's as well. Poets attracted to boys constitute a who's who. Desire for boys, but not behavior or lust, was permissible under Islam, but behavior was common nonetheless. Impermissible. The tradition eroded in the late 19th century in reaction to Western abhorrence and efforts to modernize. So, because Daniel's been quoting from Bruce Ryan's paper for years, he's put himself in a trilemma. Either he has not read it, he's lying about what it is, or he secretly agrees with a lot of the things Bruce Ryan says and wants to return Islam to the days before Western influence, when big strapping Muslim men could write gay erotic poetry about boys. So I just want to say, but again, Bruce Ryan says this was eroded when Christians came in and basically ended it. So I'm sorry that we in the West came in and we took away your child brides and your gay erotic poetry with our Western values. My bad. So let's also talk about it. He says, do girls complete puberty by 8 or 9? No. According to Midwifery and Women's Health Nurse Practitioner Certification Review, the CDC as well, we don't see completion of puberty until 15 or 17, as I noted. I agree younger sexual activity for people under 18 is bad, and I don't think you should have sex outside of marriage. Okay? But his solution is child marriage. That's like saying, oh my God, I got a kitchen fire. Let's put it out by breaking the dam and flooding the neighborhood. We don't solve a problem with a bigger problem. I cited numerous studies showing how every expert around the world agrees this is harmful to children. This is harmful to their offspring. This should be abolished worldwide. He says we have to talk about channeling desires. Well, you need to remember, as you're developing as a human, your brain is developing, and researchers describe it as being plasticity. As you're developing, your prefrontal cortex is developing, and that's the part of your brain that controls inhibitions. If we have a child who deals with rage, we don't say, well, you got to deal with that right away by just going around beating people up. We tell him to control his inhibitions. When children start developing sexual desires, they need to learn to control them. We should not give them the idea that they should act on them as soon as they got them, because they're never going to learn to control those inhibitions when they become adults later and they see someone who might be tempting them or trying to get them to commit adultery. We got to learn to control these desires. This is why we slowly develop with a plastic brain, plasticity, and we learn to control our inhibitions. They need to be trained as the prefrontal cortex is developing. He cited the Talmud, but the Talmud, for example, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Kiddushin 41a says that it's forbidden for a man to marry off his daughter when she is a minor until she is well grown. Okay, I also cited scholars like Michael Satlow. You can also check out scholars like Amran Troper. They note the average age that Jewish girls were marrying was, again, late teens, early 20s, earliest as mid-teens. He can find no evidence, Michael Satlow, that girls were marrying that young. He talks about the Catholic Encyclopedia saying Mary was impregnated. She was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and that's how Jesus came into human flesh, according to the Catholic tradition. But also, she was a perpetual virgin, according to the same sources. So if we're going to go off what that says about her age, she also never had sex. It's not a comparison. Okay, There's a lot here. He said that before Montesquieu, Western Christians were not condemning minor marriage. No. Cyrannus of Ephesus talked about the dangers of it. Giles of Rome, Albertus Magnus, again, Kilton Phillips talks about this in her book. This was abhorred by a lot of medical experts. Now, did the common person not realize that? For the most part, a lot of them didn't realize how bad it was. But today, a lot of people today ignore medical experts. So what's the problem? We should go on what the medical experts of the past and the present are saying. And they all seem to point to the idea this is not necessarily the best thing to go for. Moreover, we should most of all be relying on medical experts of today, all of which condemn child marriage. Again, for all the problems I cited, I see no reason to accept this at all, given all the extensive harm it causes. So if the burden is on me, I've given the burden. I have showed how harmful it is, and it should be abolished. People in the past used to use leeches to treat all kinds of diseases. They do not treat. Okay, that does not mean we should go back to what ancient people were doing. Okay, we now know this does not work. People used to sacrifice humans to the rain gods across the globe and hoping that it would bring the rains. We now know that does not work. Okay, so we do not do those things just because people in the past did it. Okay, as regards to the Bible not giving an age, again, I'll go to Ezekiel 16 really quickly here. For example, it talks about God compares Jerusalem to his wife and says, and you grew up and became tall and arrived at full adornment. Your breasts were formed. Okay, again, according to the midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner, that does not happen until 17 when the breasts have been fully formed in the girl. And scholars like Robert Alter, Mark Rucker, Rolf Alexander all note this is talking about after puberty. So God is sort of setting the standard that sex or lovemaking comes a period even after puberty, because it says that God even passed by her again after the breast had fully formed. So there's another period of waiting. And again, this is what I can see from scholars like Peter Gentry, Andrew Mine, T.M. Lemma, Stephen Wellham, David Gundel, Ralph Alexander, Robert Alter. All of them are pointing to this. And I'm out of time. Thank you.
Are you in favor of laws that ban 2 8-year-olds fornicating?
I would be totally in favor of preventing it. I don't know how you'd make it that a law, because again, they can't even consent.
Why not? You have a law against child marriage, so why can't you have a law against fornication?
We're going to ban 2 10-year-olds for having sex. What happens if they have sex?
They are punished for that.
How?
There are sanctions. They could serve prison time. I don't know. There's some punishment on the law that makes it illegal.
So we're going to throw 9-year-olds in prison.
It's hard for you to imagine. It's hard
because
for you to imagine.
They had
but by
sex.
the way, this is Mosaic law. By the way, this is what Christianity has advocated. By the way, this is what canon law advocated. If 2 10-year-olds fornicate, they are punished according to Christian law, according to Mosaic law. This is so hard for you to imagine.
It would be quite simple for me to say they should be separated first of all. They should have to go through some sort of rehab type thing.
Because if you can start fertilizing a female as soon as she's showing signs of an imminent fertility, the period, menarche, then that will maximize, because you've secured the female right at the beginning, the start of when she will potentially.
But you can still have sex before you start maximizing fertility, right?
When the body is physically mature, according to Islamic law.
Do you know what precocious puberty is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, what is it?
It means starting puberty unusually early, beyond averages. Is there
anything in Islam that prevents you from, a man marrying a 5-year-old that started precocious puberty?
No, marriage can happen, you can arrange a marriage even as an infant, but that doesn't mean that sex is allowed.
But could a man have a marriage to a 5-year-old, consummate it if she started precocious puberty?
If she starts showing signs of physical maturity, then yes, that's permissible, as I stated.